Welcome, friends. James Corbett here with this week's edition of Propaganda Watch. And this week we're going to be breaking down this doozy of an article from The Independent, why you shouldn't read conspiracy theories about the Novichok poisoning, even if you really want to. If we get caught up in a culture of fake news, we're as bad as Donald Trump. I think you can see where this story is going already, but let's go there, shall we? This is by someone named Will Gore and was posted on the 5th of July 2018. We're obviously talking about the Novichok poisonings, which everyone will remember involves, of course, Yulia and Sergei Skripal back in March of this year, and their whatever happened in Salisbury, and right next to Pordendown, the UK chemical biological weapons testing facility, but it was the Russians. How do you know that? It was the Russians. But how do you know that? Stop asking questions. It was the Russians. And this story from The Independent is immediately in the wake of a second poisoning, which you may have heard about. This time in Amesbury, and involving Dawn Sturgis, who ended up dying from her injuries, and Charlie Rowley, who made a quick recovery. And this second poisoning was still breaking news when The Independent wrote this article, so there was not a lot of details available. But don't worry, The Independent is here to stop any thought crime before it happens and tell you why you shouldn't not just believe, but you shouldn't even read conspiracy theories about the Novichok poisoning. Evidently, all you should read is The Independent and or official pronouncements from the Met Police and the UK government. But let's read from the horse's mouth here. The apparent poisoning of a couple in Amesbury comes at an unfortunate moment, just as the diplomatic turmoil caused by the nerve agent attack on Sergei and Yulia Skripal was beginning to ease, or at least had drifted down the list of media and public talking points. Anxiety about spies and chemical weapons had given way to World Cup hysteria. In a game of Mallet's Mallet, Russia would in recent weeks be met with a response of football rather than Novichok. Interesting. Keep that in mind. So Russia is becoming more about football than Novichok, and that's all about to change because of this poisoning that is taking the headlines. Just keep that in mind. That'll come in handy later. But certainly it is an extraordinary turn of events, coming nearly 4 months after the attack which left the Skripals fighting for their lives. Having initially been cautious about drawing a link between that incident and the illness that struck down Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgis at the weekend, the police now appear convinced of a connection. Well, why? Well, indeed, the working hypothesis is that the unwitting couple who had been in Salisbury prior to falling ill, somehow or other, details schmetails, don't ask, don't tell, somehow stumbled on this poison at the location where it had been prepared before the targeting of the Skripals, or where its residue had been discarded in the aftermath. On the face of it, that feels like a perfectly plausible theory, especially when the background of the individuals affected at the weekend do not lend themselves to an alternative proposition that they were deliberate victims of a second attack. So many things going on in this paragraph alone, but let's start at the end where they assume the conclusion of the argument, namely that it was the Russians that did the Skripals, so this must be, because there's no Russian mafia, whatever, connection to this couple, it must be that they have stumbled upon the poison at the location where it had been prepared. How else would any of this play out? What could any other possible connection to the Russians be? Because it was the Russians. Again, assuming the argument. This is just total hogwash, and we'll get to that in a second. But of course, they say inevitably, though, conspiracy theories abound already, and they're going to try to shut down any alternative explanations for any of this. The funny thing, of course, is that, again, this is total hogwash, total nonsense. They somehow or other stumbled on the poison at the location where it had been prepared. What evidence is that based on? Oh, that's right, absolutely none. And in fact, again, this was written in the immediate wake of this Amesbury poisoning, but just a few weeks later, the MSM sleuths had solved the case, or some part of the case anyway, by actually, talking to one of the people involved, and found that no, they did not stumble upon some site where it was being secretly prepared by the Russian boogeyman or whatever. No, in fact, as they go on to say in this article, it's a bizarre story. You have to read it, but it's completely unclear. Somehow or other, this Charlie Rowley stumbled upon, found, bought, discovered, it's absolutely not made clear, but somehow or other suddenly got this perfume in Salisbury or maybe Amesbury, I don't remember, And he gave this perfume to Dawn Sturgis, and she put it on and got sick. Oh, well, you think, oh, well, then it's just those Russians with their Novichok. They must have left a bunch of stuff all around, right, in perfume bottles and what have you. Well, actually, I mean, this was a sealed case containing a sealed perfume container, which they had to cut open in order to get into. So what on earth is going on here? Well, you really won't find any answers from this article, only more questions. He described the bottle as glass with a plastic dispenser lid. It had come in a cardboard box, and Mr. Rowley believes it was all sealed and new. He said they had been out in Salisbury the night before they became unwell, and he could have found the bottle in the city or in Amesbury. He could have found the bottle. Like, what on earth? The grieving man admitted he had a habit of finding things, but said the gift he gave Sturgis on June 30th was a bad find. What the hell does any of this mean? What on earth is going on here? How does this relate to the Screeples? As the Moon of Alabama points out in its article here that you really should read, The Magic of Novichok, Deadly Agent Found in a Perfume Bottle, they point out all of the craziness involved in this, including, of course, the fact that we are led to believe that when the case of Yulia and Sergei Skripal, apparently it was some sort of gel-like substance that was smeared on their doorknob that they both touched, and that made them sick 4 or 5 hours later. But now this is some sort of highly fluid nerve agent in a perfume bottle that is making people sick in a matter of minutes, in a sealed perfume bottle, no less. So what exactly is this connection? How does this connect, and what does this mean, and how does this relate to the Russians? Well, again, don't think, don't ask, don't look for any evidence, because the Independent is here to tell you that you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist if you actually question any of this story and the craziness surrounding it. Now, it goes on to talk about blah, 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 crazy alternative theories. And it says, doubts about the official narrative play into the broader conspiracy favored by online dissenters, which is that the British government, having been responsible for the Skripals' poisoning, it may or may not have been a total scam, depending on which branch of the conspiracy you prefer, is also behind the hospitalization of Sturgis and Rowley. The purported motive is to renew attention on Russia's supposed involvement in the Skripals case in order to dilute the soft power victory provided by its hosting of the World Cup, or alternatively to distract attention from Brexit. Taken to its most extreme version, this extraordinary idea effectively accuses the British state of deliberately poisoning UK citizens in order to further a propaganda campaign against the Kremlin. Yeah, you think? The funny thing is, this extraordinary, extreme version of crazy conspiracy kookery is exactly what he is alluding to at the beginning of this article, where he says that Russia would in recent weeks be met with a responsive football rather than Novichok, i.e. the collective conditioning response, Russia, Novichok, is being drilled out of the population because there's a World Cup coming along and people are forgetting about this horrible, hyped terror event that we've been telling people about for months based on no evidence whatsoever. Now they're thinking about football, but that's all going to change because now we have another thing we can put in people's face. Russia, Novichok. So yes, he's admitting in the beginning of this article exactly what he's saying is an outlandish conspiracy theory in the middle of this article, namely that, yes, this is an attempt to further a propaganda campaign against the Kremlin. For people who don't know the details of that Skripal affair, I would point them to my Russian Poison Stories WMD 2.0 article from March of this year, which itself was based, of course, heavily on the work of Craig Murray, who did the yeoman's work on this story and for months afterwards, including this article that I'll throw in the links. You should really read it in its entirety, The Holes in the Official Skripal Story, where he just breaks down all of the supposed accusations against the Russians, and how none of that stands up to scrutiny or has any evidence to back it up. It's a great breakdown of that story, that propaganda narrative, that the Independent is bemoaning, oh, this is going to break down if people start questioning it. If you start questioning the government, what will happen next? And then he goes on to say, even if you do not feel comfortable with the notion that the Russian state carried out the attack on the Skripals, these contrary propositions are absurd, but they're dangerous because they gain ground in an online environment that is contemptuous of officialdom, that delights in the most outlandish conspiracies, and that is actively nurtured by shadowy and malevolent state forces. In the absence of culprits being caught in the act red-handed and a written confession from Vladimir Putin himself, the conspiracy theorists will continue to promulgate their nonsense. Can everyone point this out together with me in unison on three? 1, 2, 3. Yes, you are calling people conspiracy theorists when you are the conspiracy theorist. The conspiracy theory that it was Vladimir Putin directing some GRU operation to strike back at internet whistleblowers who have left Russia decades ago is itself a conspiracy theory, and one with no factual evidence to back it up. That is the point of this. Just because you say this happened does not mean it happened. And you cannot gaslight us into saying that we're the crazy conspiracy theorists here because we refuse to accept a narrative based on nothing whatsoever. The absurdity of this is pointed out in excellent fashion, as usual, by Caitlin Johnstone, who wrote this great article back in April. Never let anyone call you crazy for doubting establishment war narratives, in which she writes that doubting the official narrative being advanced by mainstream media is the sanest thing in the world. The U.S. centralized power establishment has an extensive and well-documented history of using lies, propaganda, and false flags to manufacture public support for pre-existing war agendas. So it is perfectly sane to express concern about the legitimacy of the stories we're being told about Duma, the Skripal case, Russian hacking allegations, etc. We've already got The Guardian lying unapologetically straight to our face right now about Russian bots. And there's more about that in this story if you go and read it. While not one single mainstream editorial opposed the British, French, and American bombing of Syria earlier this month, so it's obviously very sane to think the mainstream media may be advancing the interests of this war like they do every other. Now, this is the case. This is it in a nutshell. This is why we should not just blindly accept whatever the government and its mouthpieces in the mainstream media are telling us without any evidence whatsoever to back it up. Because, well, they said it, so it must be true. No, there is a war agenda that is at work. And we've seen this happen over and over and over and over and over. I just did that big podcast on war lies, which only scrapes the surface of the war lies that have been told over the past century. And to think now, suddenly, we should just trust whatever the government says because it says it, is nonsense. But don't worry, he gives lip service to that. None of this is to say that the public should not hold governments and officials to account, whether in this country or anywhere else. But it is plainly wrong, especially in a nation such as Britain, in which the rule of law is strong, corruption in official agencies is not endemic, and democracy functions effectively, to assume that everything that comes from the mouth of a politician or a police officer or a government spokesperson is a lie, or at best a half-truth. This gets it wrong in every respect. Of course, Britain is not a nation in which the rule of law is strong and corruption is not endemic and democracy functions effectively. It's such a great place. Not only is that wrong, but then he frames the argument by saying, oh, if you assume that everything that comes from the mouth of a politician is a lie, then you're being crazy. No, it's called the burden of proof. They have to prove what they are saying. They have to provide evidence. They cannot just say, "Oh, trust us, it was the Russians in the parlor with the candlestick." No, you have to show us the proof, the evidence. We will not believe you simply because you say it. But of course they know this. This is just gaslighting the people on whom this type of nonsense is going to be effective into questioning their own sanity. Maybe there's social pressure here. Maybe I shouldn't speak out about these conspiracies because people will not accept me into polite society. So of course then it goes on into the Donald Trump stuff and now we're losing our grip on truth and blah blah blah. Blah, blah, blah. The alternative is believing that truth is to be found in the conspiratorial rabbit holes of the internet and in the mouths of men like Trump. We need to be better than that. Well, we certainly need to be better than tripe like this nonsense from The Independent, which is just the most blatant form of crackdown on WrongThink that I can remember reading in recent times. I mean, we've seen a lot of hand-wringing and fretting about these conspiracy theories taking off on the internet, but this story particularly takes the cake in really trying to shove it in your face. So, anyway, well, I hope if anyone is on Twitter, maybe they can give Will Gore a little hat tip for his remarkable reporting. But anyway, this is just an unbelievable piece. And for anyone who doesn't get the point, the title of this video, of course, is satire. I'm not telling you not to read The Independent or any other source of news or half news or half truth or complete lie. Read it all, sure. Read any source, absolutely. That's the only way we can get to the bottom of what is actually supported by the evidence and what is not. That's why I read the MSM as well as the alternative media. And I think everyone should be getting information widely. I'm not the Independent here telling you what you should and shouldn't read, let alone what you should and shouldn't think. It's just disgusting the way they treat you like you're children, but you are adults, and that's why you are tuned into the Corbett Report. Thank you for joining me for another edition of Propaganda Watch. James Corbett here. Hope you're enjoying your summer. Talk to you again real soon.